biography.com slash
Sorry,
slash digital light. Oh, okay. That probably got interrupted, but so what?
No,
All right.
no, you're good.
The slideshow went away. Let's try that again. Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
So, all right, motivations. Why did I write this book? Well, if you think about it, nearly all pictures in existence are made of pixels now. We human beings are swimming in an ocean of, I estimate, zettapixels. That's the one with 21 zeros after it. And yet, most people don't know what a pixel is. If I quiz them, I get all kinds of answers, but the most common is this, that there are these little abutting squares. So I'm going to address this misperception because it's totally wrong. Pixels have never been little squares ever. But why is this it's got a grab on people's mind that just won't let go? So let's find out what a pixel is. Let's just start this talk by defining a pixel. Okay, so the idea starts, and my book starts, by the way, at the French Revolution with this guy, Joseph Fourier, who his story is fascinating. I have a whole chapter about him, but I'm not going to spend too much time on him today. But I think most of us recognize Fourier, at least his name. He's the guy that says you can represent a continuous function as a sum of regular waves. Now, I don't even say sine wave in my book because I avoid math, but you know what I mean, sine waves. A sum of sine waves of different frequencies and amplitudes will give you any arbitrary continuous function. There's a lot of caveats on that, but that's the general form of it. It's really obvious that that's what music is. Music is a sum of sound waves at different frequencies and different amplitudes. How fast the waves wiggle, how high they crest. But Fourier went further. By the way, he almost got his head cut off in the French Revolution. That's part of the story that I won't talk about today. And here are some of the Fourier waves that add up to give a one-dimensional signal. But his idea works for two-dimensional signals as well. In that case, and pictures, by the way, which I'm interested in, and I think you are too, are two-dimensional signals. Fourier's version, by the way, I call his theory the idea that the world is made of music. If you extrude those waves you see on the upper right there toward you, you get corrugations. And if you look down on those corrugations, this is what you see. Same idea, but this is the two-dimensional. These are two-dimensional Fourier waves. What Fourier says is pictures, no matter how erratic or whatever they are a sum of these very regular Fourier waves, such as the three examples I give at the bottom. That's a stunner, isn't it? That's why we practice Fourier for the last several hundred years, because working in nice regular Fourier space is often much easier engineering-wise than working in really nasty non-regular space. All right. I think everybody's familiar with that idea. So let's go right straight to defining a pixel. You have to know Fourier in order to get to the pixel. All right. One of the many surprises I uncovered while researching this book was to discover that the sampling theorem, the great sampling theorem, on which the pixel is based and on which all modern media is based, was not proved first by Claude Shannon, the American. In fact, Claude Shannon never even claimed he did it first, much to my amazement. So I had to do about a year's research to figure out who did the sampling theorem first. And every country has a contender, but I'm pretty convinced now that this guy, Vladimir Kotelnikov, a Soviet communist, was the first guy to do it. He published his proof of the sampling theorem in 1933 in Russian, which I don't read, but I can read the mathematics, and it's exactly the mathematics I use today for the sampling theorem. So I'll get back to what the sampling theorem is in just a moment, but I just have to tell you a couple of things about this amazing man. Well, here's the last picture we have of him. He's the guy with all the merit badges of the Soviet Union on him, the orders of Lenin, the orders of Stalin, the red this, the red that. He's standing in the Kremlin with Vladimir Putin, who's just knighted him, or whatever the equivalent in Russia is, for having proved 70 years earlier the paper shown at the top there. In other words, in Russia, they know who proved the sampling theorem first and are extremely proud of the fact. And I'm convinced they're right, that this guy did it first. Now, let me just throw a couple, I mean, his story, his chapter, I have a whole chapter devoted to him, but just a couple of tidbits. He came over, Vladimir Kotelnikov came over to us, to America, in a couple of times. The second time was in 1957. He came to a conference in Boulder, Colorado, and announced to the scientists there that Russia was going to put up a satellite in a couple of months, and it would broadcast at 2 particular frequencies. He told us about Sputnik before it went up, and it was exactly those 2 frequencies at which Sputnik broadcast. One other thing, he was a lot of Russian scientists during these Stalin years were thrown into the Gulag. Not our man. He was saved from going into the Gulag by a woman protectress, Valeria Golubtsova, who was married to Malenkov, the guy who took over from Stalin, so just as bloody as Stalin. So the story is amazingly thick. But as far as I can tell, he's the guy who did it. All right, what is the sampling theorem? What is this all important thing that everybody wants to play? Before I move off this slide, just record that shape right there. I call that shape a spreader, and you'll see why in a moment. All right, let's work in the one-dimensional case, and then we'll go to the two-dimensional case of pictures in a moment. This is just say this is a one-dimensional sound versus time function. So it's the amplitude of sound versus time going to the right, and the straight line there is 0 loudness. So what the sampling theorem, what Kotelnikov told us, proved it with mathematically, was that if you put dots along that wave, regularly spaced dots along that signal at a certain frequency, which I'll come back to in a moment, then listen carefully because this is a mind blower. Then you can throw away the original signal between those samples and not lose anything. Did you hear that? You can throw away the infinity of dots between the sample points and not lose any of the information carried in that original signal. We call the points the samples. I've already said so, I think. How could that be? Well, the mathematics says it's so. What is the frequency you have to space the dots at? Well, remember, Fourier told us that original signal is a sum of Fourier waves, of sine waves, you might want to call them. And Kotelnikov said, take the Fourier frequency component of the highest frequency and sample at twice that rate. And I contend that the wave I'm showing here is the component of highest frequency in the Fourier sum that adds up the original signal. The reason I can say that is because there's nothing that wiggles any faster in the original signal. If there was, then there had to be a higher frequency. Okay, that's the first half of the sampling theorem. Sounds like something from nothing. Wait a minute. I can throw away an infinity of information and not lose it? Wow. All right. The other half of the theorem says, 10 years later on the other side of the globe, I want to have those samples of that sound signal. How do I get that original signal back so I can hear it? Well, remember this shape? I called it a spreader. Now, mathematicians call this a sink. Sink is too mathematical for my book, so just remember the shape. The problem with this perfect spreader is that it ripples off to infinity in both directions. In other words, it's infinitely wide and therefore impractical in the real world. You can't use infinitely wide anything in the real world. So we replace it with good approximations. And I claim that this is a very popular approximation to this one, to this spreader, the ideal spreader. Except it's a finite width now. It's 0.
The totals for whatever time.
I'm sorry, somebody was talking over me. So what Kotelnikov said is take that spreader and spread each sample. That's why I call it a spreader. Take a copy of the spreader and put it at each sample and adjust its height so it matches the height of the sample, and then add up the results. And that bold line, which is the sum, is the original signal reconstructed. It's magic, something from nothing. The missing infinity has been restored. It's one of the most amazing theorems of all times. And it's the basis of everything we do in digital audio, in digital video, in modern media. Movies, for example, are all done that way too. Okay, that's the one-dimensional case. The two-dimensional case, it's the same thing, but just a little harder to draw pictures of. The spreader looks like this in 2 dimensions. And by a two-dimensional signal, my example will be a picture. That's what we're interested in, right? So this is the spreader for samples of 2D signals. And I cut it right down I dropped a guillotine through the summit of that little hillock to show you that the cross section has the shape of the spreader that we used in the one-dimensional case. And in this picture, I show one sample being spread by this spreader function. We have a name for a sample of a picture. It's a pixel. That's the definition. Okay. Now, 2 things immediately I bring to mind. A sample exists only at a point. 0-dimensional. You cannot see a pixel. Kind of the first surprise. Pixels are invisible. What you can see is a spread pixel. So if you have your cell phone's a very popular display device. I don't know about you, but I've got several billion pixels stored in here. I can't see any of them unless I ask it to be displayed on the screen here. What you see are not the pixels, but are those little display elements that are that your display screen is made of. They have shape, they're soft, they're analog, they overlap, and they are the equivalent of that little hillock I just showed you in this slide. They are not to be confused with pixels or called pixels. They're a completely different kind of thing. A pixel is universal. A display element varies from device to device. All right. Let's go back to that original, the very common misperception that pixels are little squares. Where in the heck did that come from? I'm pretty sure one of the reasons is that people have this notion that a computer is a rigid, linear, blocky device, and therefore that's what its pictures ought to look like. But none of what I just said about computers is true. They're infinitely versatile. So another reason, and I think this is the main reason that people think pixels are little squares, is when you magnify your screen with something called zoom or magnify, you see little squares. So I'm going to do that right now, but the sum of my argument is it's a lie. All right, so I use Photoshop to make this picture of 14 gray pixels. You can't see them, right? They're too tiny. So we can zoom, right? All apps have a zoom function. And in Photoshop, it's called zoom in. Suppose we zoom in by a factor of 100, just arbitrary number. You get this. So it must be that those little original pixels were little squares, right? No, because all that zoom does, it's a dirty trick. It takes each of the original pixels and replaces it with a 100 by 100 square array of copies of that pixel. It's really quick and dirty to do that in hardware is the reason it's so popular. Which makes you, and what does a 100 by 100 square array of a single color look like? A little square. It's just not true, however. If you do the magnification correctly, let's go back to the original picture. Using the sampling theorem, this is what, this is what you get. It's like, you can think each of those blobs as being that little hillock I showed you earlier, looking down on it from above. Soft, overlapping, not square. Pixels have never been little squares ever. Okay. Now I want to go to a brief history of movies. And I have several reasons for doing this. One is I think you guys are interested in movies. Two is I have there were several themes that arose over the 10 years I worked on this book. And one of them is that the histories of high technologies are a pack of lies. They're just not told right. And the problem seems to be that we human beings are suckers for the single hero creates the narrative of the single hero genius who creates everything. We're just suckers for that story. It's hardly ever true. So I substitute. Flip told you I'm interested in genealogy, very interested. I'm one of the 50 fellows of the American Society of Genealogy. So I use a genealogical approach. I show you the family of people involved in the creation of a technology. In this case, it's cinema. By that, I mean the machines that make cinema. One of the things I had to be very careful about in each of these histories is defining terms. What is a movie machine? Well, it's a camera and film and a projector. You don't have a movie machine until you have all three of those. Just a camera, you haven't done it yet. Okay. So I ask people, just friends and people I meet on the street, who invented the movies? Well, I get one of these three. Muybridge, Edison, or the Lumiere brothers. Nearly always it's one of those three that people come up with. But if you look at this chart, you can see that it's not any of them really. It's the next line of people where the inventors appear. And I'm going to I don't want you to spend time trying to master this slide because you can't. There's too much information in here. I just want you to understand the notion of there is no single path through this history of cinema. There is no single hero. And there are lots of people sharing ideas with one another, stabbing each other in the back, stealing ideas from one another. It's really kind of nasty when you get down to the details. And a lot of the people are just forgotten. So two people I want to point out are William Kennedy Laurie Dixon and Georges Diminuit. So I'm not going to spend time on Diminuit. That's sort of the French equivalent. I could spend a whole hour talking about the French side of this story versus the American side. But let's just talk about, let me show you some pictures. And I'll sort of let you see how I think a history ought to be told. Okay. You remember, so Edward Muybridge is often listed as one of the inventors of the movies. And by the way, people often struggle with his name. They say, Edward Muybridge. They screw up pucker up their lips and say, no, his name, well, what is his name? The guy on the left is Leland Stanford. We can ignore him for the time being. Well, let's don't ignore him. Muybridge got famous for photographing Leland Stanford's trotter horses with all 4 hooves off the ground at the same time. Okay. And then the story goes from there, he invented cinema. Well, that's not quite the way it worked in lots of ways. Well, first of all, let's just talk about Edward himself. His name wasn't Edward Muybridge at all to start with. It was Teddy Muggeridge. And he was born in a town called Kingston-on-Thames in England. And in that town is a coronation stone where many of the early kings of England were crowned, including a couple of Edwards spelled in the old spelling, Eadweard. That's where our guy Muybridge came up with his final name. By the way, at the table at the top shows you all the aliases he used during his lifetime. Mugridge to Mugridge to Mygridge to Mybridge to Helios. The single name Helios is one I kind of like when he was a photographer. And then when he was 52 years old, he adopted the weird spelling of Edward that's on the coronation stone in his hometown. And that funny, it's just Edward Mygridge, folks. Mybridge. You don't have to pucker up your lips to say it. And what did he actually do? Well, he took a disc. Now, these discs are large, they're bigger than an LP record, and had an artist transfer with India ink a silhouette from one of his photographs of Stanford's horse onto a position on the disc. It's okay. So one of the reasons I don't think he invented the movies, he didn't use film in his movie system. He used, you might say he invented rotoscoping, but there's a problem with that too. There's a flaw in the projection system of Muybridge's Praxiscope, it was called. And that is that it elongates horizontally. So he had, no, it's the other way around. It shortens horizontally. So he had the artist doing the ink tracings lengthen horizontally so that when the shortening happened in the projection system, it would look like a horse. So I find it really hard to believe that a system that wasn't based on film and only had about 12 to 24 frames and was stretched horizontally can somehow be construed as the invention of the movies. Just not so. But he was a great Johnny Appleseed. And he's such a character, I had to put him in the book. You know, he was a murderer. He shot his wife's lover point blank with a pistol that he intended for the purpose. But the jury let him off for defending his honor, if you can believe that. All right, let's talk about William Kennedy Laurie Dixon, the guy on the right. The guy on the left is Edison in what I call his Napoleonic pose. Edison's famous for setting up these wonderful laboratories, well provided for laboratories, and finding inventors to come in and work for him and invent like crazy. The trouble was that he then put his name on every invention and took all the money and all the patents. One of the guys who figured out early that he was getting screwed was W.K.L. Dixon, the guy on the right, who built the camera for Edison that became part of Edison's peep show. He's the guy, not Edison. W.K.L. Dixon. The next thing Dixon did was he mastered the 35 millimeter film format that was the standard during the last century. 35 millimeters wide, 4 perfs, both sides of the frame, per frame. But he saw that Edison was never going to give him credit, so he jumped ship. Also, Edison didn't want to build a projector, and Dixon understood you had to have a projector in order to have a system that made sense. So he set up a competing company called Biograph, and so forth. These stories can go on and on and on and on and on, but I'd like to put Dixon on your map. There's a book out now about him, written by the curator, the recently deceased curator of the cinema at the Library of Congress, Paul Speyer, who helped me with my book a great deal. All right, now I'm going to leap to another important. I really want to get to computer graphics, right? Because that's my specialty. I want to discuss the history of computers. Well, and computation. Well, although there were earlier influences, the guy who just nailed this one was Alan Turing, the guy on the left running a marathon. The only guy alive at the time who was smart enough to know exactly what Alan Turing had done was the guy sitting ass backwards on his mule at the edge of the Grand Canyon John von Neumann. You notice he's the only guy wearing a three-piece business suit, no hat, and I've already said it, his mule's facing the wrong way. Nevertheless, these two guys both simultaneously realized that Alan Turing's invention of the stored program computer, by the way, a mathematician invented the notion of the stored program computer, not engineers. Engineers gave us Moore's law that made the stored program computer the marvel that we have today. And I'll come back to that in a moment. So remember my approach is genealogical. So sure enough, here's the beginning of the chart, which is the history of computers. And you see that sure enough, Alan Turing and von Neumann are at the top. Turing's paper on computable numbers is where it all began. And then all of a sudden, boom, we run into all kinds of different people, and their lines are joining them in both directions. No, I have no time to go through all the interesting history there, but it's all in my book. I just want to pick out two. So both von Neumann and Turing realized that Alan Turing's idea had to go fast if it was going to be interesting. In other words, you had to implement computation in hardware because speed was everything when it comes to computation. And they both set out to do it. Alan Turing set out to build Pilot Ace, which he failed at, by the way. And von Neumann set out to build, well, he wrote a paper with others called the EDVAC report, which was so influential that it affected almost every early computer except Pilot Ace. But the two I want to talk about in particular are Baby and Whirlwind. Baby was the first computer. And when I say computer, I mean electronic stored program computer. That's the definition. A vacuum tube, a calculating machine, an arithmetic calculating machine made of vacuum tubes isn't a computer. It's got to be a stored program, programmable device to be a computer. Baby was first, 1948, and we'll come back to that in a minute. So as part of my research, but by the way, look at the lower right of this chart, and you'll see modern computer graphics descends largely from the Whirlwind computer that was built at MIT. All right, here's Baby. I went to visit Baby as part of my research, and this is Baby's. This is part of Baby in Manchester, England, and this is the display that was showing this when I showed up. And the word Pixar was scrolling to the right. So the surprise, and it surprised me because I thought I knew the history of computer graphics a little bit, was, wait a minute, the first computer had pixels and it could animate? Who knew? 1948, computers and pixels were born at the same time. Here's the actual first digital image ever made and it was photographed by Tom Kilbert, who was one of the two engineers who built Baby. And then I went in search of other first and found this first game, interactive game, 1951, also in Manchester. And this is like the third, I believe, game. It is. It's the third game from 1953 from Cambridge, England. And so what I want you to record there, those 40s and 50s, those are about a decade earlier than what I expected the history of computer graphics to be. Then I spent a wonderful day in the archives of, it turns out to be the MITRE Corporation has the archives, the photographic archives of the Whirlwind computer, which was the first computer to have an actual display device aimed at display of pictures and nothing else, not to show you what was in memory, nothing else. It was to show you pictures that were based on what was calculations from its memory. Here are some samples just to show you. But the main thing I want you to see is those last two pictures, the Hello, Mr. Murrow. The first animation You know, I showed Pixar scrolling that baby could animate in 1948. It didn't. Nobody did that. But in 1951, on Whirlwind, somebody did the equivalent animation on the Edward R. Murrow show, 1951. Again, another like a decade earlier than I expected. So let's continue that preceding flow chart or family tree or genealogy, whatever you want to call it. You'll see there's the Whirlwind box that it repeats the Whirlwind box at the bottom right of the previous slide. So these threads just continue. Again, way too many names to spend time on here today. I want to emphasize these three. But before we go there, oops, I want you to just look to the upper right there, saved from the Nazis. It turns out my first boss out of, I graduated, I got my PhD at Stanford in '69, and my first job was at NYU, New York City. And my first boss was Herb Freeman, who was turns out to be one of the earliest computer graphics guys in the world. I didn't know it at the time. It was a sheer luck. And he had been saved by Albert Einstein from the Nazis. Einstein wrote 3 letters that saved him. Just a quick story. Marceli Wine, who lives on one of the islands in the St. Lawrence, co-wrote one of the original in-betweening programs, computer in-betweening programs. He was in the Warsaw Ghetto when it was cleared out by the Nazis to Auschwitz. He was a kid, and his father shoved him off into a crowd. A woman saved him and raised him as a Catholic kid, and he managed to rejoin his father, who had been sent to Auschwitz, remember, in Canada, because his father was a master tailor who was saved by Schindler by being number 5 on Schindler's List. Great stories, right? All right, let's go to these 3 guys. Ivan, Tim, and Larry. Ivan Sutherland, Tim Johnson, and Larry Roberts. Were all at MIT, and here's what they look like. And it's important that you see what they look like because Ivan Sutherland, guy on the left, everybody's heard about him. In fact, the received version of computer graphics history usually goes, Ivan Sutherland wrote Sketchpad in about '62, first interactive computer graphics program, and all of computer graphics descends from there. It's just not right. It's a really important event. Don't get me wrong, it's really important. But one of my first surprises was to discover that Sketchpad was only 2D. The 3D, Sketchpad 3 was written by the guy in the middle, who was a classmate of Ivan Sutherland. His name is Tim Johnson. He's still with us, and he's never received the credit he fully deserves. And the reason is, I'm convinced, is he looks almost identical to Ivan Sutherland. And so a couple of months ago, I went out to Google. I typed in Ivan Sutherland and chose images, show me images of Ivan Sutherland. Over 60% of the pictures that came up purporting to be Ivan Sutherland at the control of Sketchpad were of Tim Johnson at the control of Sketchpad 3, the first interactive 3-dimensional program in the world, from which everything I've done descends. The perspective used in Tim's Sketchpad 3 was provided by the third guy on the screen, name of Larry Roberts, recently deceased, who's also not given enough credit by the computer graphics community. Before he died, I asked him about that. He says, Alvy, I've got so much glory for being one of the fathers of the internet, I don't really care. So, but the two of them, Tim Johnson and Larry Roberts, instituted what I call the central dogma. I think I'm the first to articulate it. And it is that in computer graphics, we will model in 3D Euclidean geometry, and we will project those 3D models into 2 dimensions using Renaissance perspective. And the reason I call this a dogma is because there's nothing about computers that requires those 2 assumptions. I'll come back to this in a moment. Now then, so far, we've been talking about what I call epic 1 of computer history. You see baby at lower left there. Um, this was the era of dinosaurs. You know, as the machines got more powerful, they got larger. And they were pretty dumb too, to be honest, even though nobody thought of it at the time that way. But in 1965, a miracle occurred, or at least it got announced. It's called Moore's Law. And that's when I say Epic 2 began. So I want to spend a little time here on Moore's Law because it's so important. Um, here's my version of Moore's Law. Usually here it's like the density of components on an integrated circuit chip will double every 18 months, every year and a half. I don't know about you, but that doesn't mean much to me. So I put it into terms which are equivalent, but very meaningful, and I think very memorable. And this is the way I express Moore's Law. Everything good about computers gets better by an order of magnitude. That's a factor of 10 every 5 years. Now, everything good about computers is directly related to how dense the components on the chip are. Okay. And the rest of it is just mathematically equivalent to what the original formulation was. I use order of magnitude instead of factor of 10 because an order of magnitude is about the maximum change that we puny human beings can understand. We have to go through conceptual changes in order to get to the next order of magnitude. Now, here's why I think it's really important to understand Moore's Law, what it says. There will be one of those conceptual leap changes every 5 years. Starting in 1965, you can think of Moore's Law factor was 1 that year. That's the year I made my first computer graphic image, by the way. Today, we're sitting at a Moore's Law factor of 100 billion. So everything good about computers today is 100 billion times better than it was in 1965. We humans can't, we just have to live that. We don't know what it means. By the way, Moore's Law is definitely not dead. It's still going and it's going to hit a trillion about 2025. Moore's Law factor will be about a trillion. What exactly does that mean? That's the point. We don't know. Well, just another statement. This is the dynamo that has driven my entire career and yours, and will continue until they actually do hit a wall on Moore's Law. I guess they might. The engineers suffer from the same order of magnitude limitation as the rest of us. They have to get to one order of magnitude before they can even start to conceive how to get to the next one. What practically in pixels Moore's Law brought us was color. Have you noticed there have been no color pictures up till this? We just didn't have the wherewithal. Moore's Law made it possible. As one of the tasks from my book was to find the first color pixels. I need to stop and ask Flip or somebody how I'm doing on time. That introduction took a little longer than I thought, your introduction. How am I doing? What should I plan on?
Sorry about that. That was, yeah, no, it's always my fault. Yeah, we got the room for quite a while. So please go on.
I'll just present my talk as I planned it then. Okay.
Yeah.
I just realized that we're approaching 7 already. I went, oh my gosh, I'm not anywhere close to the end. All right.
Yeah, no.
Okay. I'll skip through it. I found that I had a lot of fun doing this, but I finally found the first color pixels, and they happened earlier than I thought, but after Moore's Law. You're looking at them. They occurred on a flight simulator for the Apollo Moon project. And not only that, but the first shaded renderings of computer graphics objects occurred then too. 1967, again, earlier than I thought. Now this is another one of I know these charts are scary. This is a continuation of the preceding 2 charts, okay? And the connect point is Ivan Sutherland and Herb Freeman. But basically the message I want to get across is all these threads of all these people are integrating in different ways to give three big stories that I cover in the book, namely the group New York Tech, Lucasfilm, Pixar that brought us Toy Story, but the same rethreading of the same folks gave us DreamWorks and Blue Sky and two other of the earliest computer movies. One thing I had to add to this chart, though, was this group of people, which I think has sort of been omitted from the computer graphics history so far. Rod Rougelot and Bob Schumacher were the two engineers who built that simulator for the Apollo Moon project. They brought us the color pixel and the first rendered 3D renderings. And then they built a machine. So those were real-time simulators, right? Millions of dollars. Then they built, if you look down below Rod Rougelot's name, there's non-RT. They built a non-real-time version so they could play with the ideas that they come up with. And at that point, Rod Rougelot invited his buddy Don Greenberg over to use this machine. Well, Don, from that little event, the Cornell University contribution to computer graphics began. So Don had tried to tell me for years that he didn't think the history of computer graphics was quite right. And now I understand what he was trying to tell me. All right, let's look at pictures. This is 5 years after that first picture I showed you, the first color pixels. This is Ed Catmull's hand and Fred Park's face in the 1972 era at University of Utah. So these are movies, some of the first movies, perhaps the first two movies of shaded graphics. But you'll notice they're only gray. Don Greenberg's group at Cornell was doing shaded graphics that year. It was called the Cornell movie. All right, a few years after that, I get this cushy job at Xerox Palo Alto Research Center. My friend Dick Shelp had written Super Paint, a program where you could paint on a computer. He knew I was a painter. I'd grown up, by the way, painting with oils and acrylics on canvas, and it was a hobby of mine. So when I saw it, so Dick couldn't wait to show me his Super Paint program because it was computers and painting combined. And I must say, I did not know until I wrote this book that these weren't the first color pixels. They were the first ones I ever saw. And just flipped me out, and I changed my life immediately, got myself hired on at Xerox PARC. My first theoretical contribution was the HSB to RGB color transform, shown at the top. All right, but I got fired. I didn't last very long at Xerox PARC because PARC decided to go black and white. Xerox, I should say, decided to go black and white. And I went, are you sure? I mean, you've got the lead on the world and it's going to be color. And they said, you may be right, Alvy, but it's a corporate decision to go black and white. So, bye. And found my way to the New York Institute of Technology on the fabulous North Shore of Long Island, Great Gatsby land. This is one of the mansions on the New York Tech campus. The New York Tech campus is 4 estates cobbled together, and the mansions on those estates are the buildings on the campus, which was run by this guy, Alexander Schur, when I showed up with David DeFrancisco, an artist friend of mine. So David and I we needed to find the next frame buffer. Dick Shelp's paint program had the first paint color frame buffer that was generally accessible, but I'd been fired. So for all practical purposes, so we needed the next one in order to satisfy a grant with the National Endowment for the Arts. This guy had bought the next frame buffer. It hadn't been delivered yet, but we got ourselves there as fast as we could. It's hard to describe how fabulous this place is. The mansion you're looking at, the D. Seversky mansion, is where we did video. Through the woods, to the left of screen, is another mansion where we did computer graphics. And my girlfriend lived in a third mansion, and David and I lived in a fourth mansion. It's just amazing. I wake up every day kid from New Mexico, pinching myself. Is this a movie? No, this is for real. But this is the guy. This is the first of 3 patrons for the group now known as Pixar. He's the one that nobody knows about. He was probably the boldest or the craziest or both along the way. He bought us the first 24-bit pixels in the world. Up until, so Xerox PARC had 8-bit pixels. The NASA simulator had 6-bit pixels. I explained to Alexander Schur, Uncle Alex we called him, I explained to him that 24 bits gave us 16 million colors. And with that, it was essentially a continuum and we could do anything. Not knowing if he understood me at all. Came back a few weeks later, he says, Alvy, I bought you 2 more of those 8-bit thingies. So no, 5 more of those 8-bit thingies. So you'd have 2 of those 24-bit thingies. And we went nuts making art, 24-bit. I met this kid, Ed Catmull, there. And he and I invented the Alpha Channel. Now, the Alpha Channel, we didn't realize how profound it was when we did it. We just did it to solve a problem. And it was easy for us to, we already had so much more memory than anybody else in the world. It was easy for us just to add a 4th channel. So we did it overnight. There I did a piece called Sunstone. That's me on the left with black hair. Ed Ebschwiller is the main artist. And he and I did this early piece of 3D computer animation, which I'm very proud of today. It's in the collection of the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. Then we finally decided that, oh, hey, Uncle Alex hasn't got it to take us. You know, we had the idea on his campus of being the first group in the world ever to make a completely digital movie. So about 1975, we had the vision, not knowing it was going to take us 20 years to get there. But we did figure out that Uncle Alex wasn't the guy to get us there. So we leapt to California when George Lucas beckoned. And while one of the things that happened was wasn't George Lucas, it was Paramount Pictures that came to me and my group of geniuses and asked us to be in the movies. And we did the Genesis demo for Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. That was the first outing of the group that would later be known as Pixar on the big screen. No characters though, just special, you know, special effects. So that was 82. In 84, well, I should say, bring a SIGGRAPH story here for you guys at SIGGRAPH. So at the 1983 SIGGRAPH, Ed and I are flying back, and on the plane, we decided at the 84 SIGGRAPH, 1 year hence, to be held in Minneapolis. Flip mentioned it earlier. We would announce to the world that we did character animation. So, in fact, we showed a piece called The Adventures of Andre and Wally B. This is 4 successive frames from Andre and Wally B, just to show you that not only had we introduced character animation by hiring this animation genius, John Lasseter, but we had also solved motion blur. This is 4 successive frames. It was something we had to solve in order to be ready for the big time. That same year, Tom Porter, one of my geniuses, made this piece called 1984, obviously, which demonstrated that we had technically solved everything we needed to solve for the big time. And that makes me bring back up the central dogma because we've added one element to it. Euclidean geometry, Renaissance perspective, Newtonian physics. Again, computers don't require these 3 things. So one of my pleas to any artists that might be lingering out there is help us break out of the central dogma and see what else is out there. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip a movie that we almost made called Monkey. And I'm going to skip the fact that, I'm not going to skip it. Ed and I decided, George and Marcia Lucas got divorced, and that means half the money goes with each spouse, just without question. So I went into Ed Catmull, my buddy, and said, hey, George never really understood who we are. He's just lost half his fortune. He can't afford to support us any longer. We're going to get fired. it would be a sin if this group of geniuses dispersed. Let's start a company. And he agreed. Now, I have to emphasize, this is two computer nerds talking, not business guys. The amazing thing is, we went to a bookstore and bought How to Start Company books, and the amazing thing is that it worked. We went through a hell of a time getting funded. 45 different funders turned us down. 35 VC firms turned us down. 10 corporations turned us down. We did a Hail Mary pass at Steve Jobs and he didn't turn us down. And that's one of the few nice things I have to say about that guy. But he, for whatever reasons, he came through with the money when nobody else would. Can't they say that? And sure enough, so we knew, Ed and I knew when we started Pixar, we could not, computers were too slow to do a movie. So we were a hardware company for 5 years and we weren't very good. We kept running out of money. And when you run out of money, bad things happen. In our case, Steve would tear Ed and me, just tear us apart. But he did not want to be embarrassed by the second thing after his being thrown out of Apple being a failure. So he would write a check and take away our equity until finally, after a bunch of years, he finally did own Pixar. By the way, he did not buy Pixar from Lucasfilm. That's not at all what happened. But sure enough, 5 years later, the wait for Moore's Law paid off, and Disney knocked on our door and said, okay, guys, that movie you always wanted to make, let's make it. We'll pay for it. So they saved Steve's embarrassment, and he cleverly turned around and took the company public on nothing but the promise of this movie and became a billionaire overnight. And so I'm going to close just by saying, in 1995, we came out. In fact, I say at the millennium, we came out with Toy Story. It's actually 5 years earlier, but Ants came out in 1998, and Ice Age came out in 2002, I think. I may be off a little bit on these numbers, but the fact is that the movies were starting to happen coincident with the millennium, 2000. So I call that the arrival of the great digital convergence, when all of the old media types disappeared and were replaced once and for all with the digital media type, which is what we've been talking about today. Thanks a lot.
That was great, Alvy. That was wonderful. The yeah, that whole equity thing going away. That's why I still have a job and have to work every day, is because when I left the company, I got a check for $127 for my share of the stock.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah, it started out good. And again, I didn't want to bring back too much, but the company just did, much like Moore's Law was about doubling. The company, we grew, we were tiny, and then we got huge, and then it was a Moore's Law halving of the company every couple of months, or every 6 months or so, with the whatever, the sword of Steve every once in a while. So
yeah.
Let's see here. So yeah, questions, anybody?
Well, I can see one question right now in the chat I can answer.
Okay, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Are we still in the second epoch of computer graphics? Yes, of computer history, not just computer graphics, but we're still in the Moore's Law epoch 2. Moore's Law is not dead, even though, let me just tell you, I was born before computers. I've watched the entire thing unwind. I've seen all of Moore's Law unwind. I've heard the death of Moore's Law announced 3 or 4 times in my career, and it's never happened. Like I said, engineers have to get to the next order of magnitude before they can even start to conceive how to get to the next one. But they always do, or at least so far they have. It was just like 2 or 3 or 4, maybe 4 months ago now, that IBM announced a new 2 nanometer technology. That's Moore's Law being improved, folks. It's still happening.
Yeah, it's the whatever announcements of my death have been greatly exaggerated.
Yeah.
You know,
What I want to say, I should add immediately, is I have no idea what that's going to feel like. And I don't think you do either.
Yeah.
The only way we've been able to figure out what it feels like is just ride the curve. By the way, it's really hard to go backwards on the curve too. I've lived through it, so I know what it was like back when Moore's Law was 1. And us old timers like to tell, like to reminisce about how horrible it was to have only 16K memory and so forth. But only us old, nobody else cares. And you young people should never have to care about that. You start with wherever Moore's Law is now and take it on up.
Yeah. Yeah, I like to think about that. I was born the year before Moore's Law was 1, and I mean, again, no consciousness obviously early on, but just riding the tail end of it out recently has been, exciting in that regard. The fact that this thing, I always tell my students, compared to the Pixar image computer that sat in my, that occupied a cubic yard of space next to my desk, right? This is a million times more. It's 6 orders of magnitude faster.
And if you do the computations, you'll see that it fits right on Moore's Law.
Yeah.
Every time I've done the calculations, it's just dead on right.
Yeah.
I'm not sure why, but I spent some time in my book trying to figure out why Moore's Law is Moore's Law.
Yeah, and I like your reformulation. Just from a completely random side note, your reformulation is a lot better. I mean, it's like you said, 1.5 or all these, trying to work in these different cognitive.
You can't do it, right? You just can't do it.
Yeah. 5, 10 times what makes it good. That's definitely perfect. So let's see here. So Tom Kinsman says he works in embedded computers where power is scarce. The goal is to do much better with power in the pixels. And he's talking about 8x8 sensors. So to go backwards to save power.
Okay, that's a good observation.
Yeah.
That's why we have these brilliant engineers like you, I guess, Tom, in order to solve that.
Yeah,
I couldn't.
Anybody inside here have any questions from our peanut? We do have a peanut gallery here, which is awesome. It's awesome to have real people. Yeah. Anything from you guys? Yeah. Mark.
Hello. Hi, Mark. I'm one of the 3D animation professors here. I was wondering, in the viewing of the history of computers, or at least a part of the graphics end of it, what, in your opinion, has been one of the kind of coolest things that you've been a part of or been witness to?
Can somebody repeat that question for me?
Yeah, no, that's okay. We have a bad mic set up here. He just wanted to know what, of all the things you've been involved in, the coolest, kind of the phenomenologically coolest thing that you've seen, having experienced all of this across, all these years.
Oh, that's hard to say. I was so lucky to have been at Xerox PARC, New York Tech, JVL, Pixar, and Lucasfilm. Every one of those was a hell of an event. Of course, I'm immensely proud of Pixar. There's just no question about it. Let me just tell you a story about this. Probably is, this would be a Lucasfilm story before we broke off and did Pixar. Some of my geniuses, I call them, this Rob Cook, Lauren Carpenter, and Tom Porter were solving motion blur. And they were on to a way of solving it that was mind-blowingly beautiful, and nobody had got there before. And they were making breakthroughs like every 20 or 30 minutes as they brainstormed their way through it. And every 15 minutes, one of them would show up in my office. I felt like I was daddy, right? Like, Dad, look what we just did. And I got to sit there and just revel in these these brilliant guys just laying out to me the solution for a problem that had bugged us for years. And you know, some of the smartest minds in computer graphics had tried to solve this problem and failed, and these guys were doing it. Almost, it felt like in real time they were doing it. That was damned exciting.
That was the best part about starting there when I did, honestly, was that I just walked in, everybody, you know, whatever, Rob Cook took care of my cat for a week, you know, and he's solving
did,
motion
yeah.
blur. And Pat Hanrahan
Yeah.
is over here, you know, asking about, hey, what kind of file formats did you guys use? You know, and it was just, it was so, for Silicon Valley, you know, to call it Silicon Valley's old disingenuous, because we were definitely far away from that, but it was so exciting that no matter where you went in those buildings, no matter where you went, there was somebody that had something cool to show you. No matter, you'd go sit down in anybody's desk and they'd have something cool to show you, you know, from and that you know, DJ and his crazy, DJ was the Klinger of wasn't it Klinger? No, who was the acquisition guy on MASH? The guy, he was able to get, there were guys that were, right?
Anything.
Yeah.
DJ could get anything.
Yeah, what do you need? You know, and he would get that stuff. And my favorite story was about him. I went into his office once and he had these giant boards full of just RAM that was soldered into the boards. And it's like, what are these things? And apparently there was he had figured out, he had somebody design naked boards that they soldered RAM into because there was a excise tax, there was some kind of tax if you bought loose RAM chips. There was a huge import tax on those. But if they were already soldered into something, then there was no tax on them. And so he like got these boards full of RAM that we put in the Pixar image computer, but he got it for half the price, and we didn't pay tax on it because they were soldered into things. You know,
No, he was really good.
Yeah.
Thomas Kinsman, the answer to your question is all diagrams you've seen tonight are in the book.
Yeah, they're in the book. Yeah. Let's see. In your opinion, what's the next big problem to solve in computer graphics?
Oh, whoa. Okay, so I'm watching, not that this is the one, mixed reality. So one of the things I'm doing in my old age is I'm advising a VR startup company called Baobab Studios. So Chinese American woman is one of the co-founders, and her other co-founder is Eric Darnell, who was the director of the Madagascar series for DreamWorks. So a no slouch group. All right. So I like to advise them just so I can keep my hands in the entrepreneurial insanity, because it's a special place to be. Scary, but very exciting. And let's see, what did I start there? Oh, so that's VR, straight VR, where you synthesize everything inside the goggles. The entire world is synthesized. Augmented reality is you scan in the world you're passing through and put superimposed graphics on it. Mixed reality is where you extract a 3D model from the world that you're passing through, and you mix it with the 3D model that you've got stored in your memory, a la computer graphics, so that the two models mix together and do all the things those models should do, like cast shadows on one another, be transparent to one another, light sources in one, illuminate objects in the other. There are a lot of nasty problems there to solve, I suspect, but knowing the computer graphics community, I'm sure they're hard at work on cracking all those problems. I'm kind of looking forward to that. That's one thing. The second thing is most people don't know this, but I started out in 1965 at Stanford studying this new idea, this new subject called AI. It was so sexy that I went there on purpose to learn it. And after a couple of years, I don't think this is going to happen in my lifetime. Namely, I didn't think we'd figure out how this thing works with computer models in my lifetime, that I should change to something that would actually might happen, like the first digital movie. But hey, the first digital movie got done decades ago, and AI is still cranking along, and things are looking kind of interesting out there again. So, I've been following along. I don't know where it is yet, but that plus the continued explosion of the supernova known as Moore's Law just keeps me excited. There might be something, there's almost certainly something there that will amaze us for the next several decades. Either that or scare the pants off of us. I can't tell which.
Yeah, there was one question. Can you, speak up?
Yeah, hi, I'm Jack. I'm a 3D digital design student, and I wanted to ask, what's the best way to network and to make connections to really get your foot in the door? And I also wanted to
SIGGRAPH,
ask-
SIGGRAPH, go to SIGGRAPH.
How did I meet
It's
you?
been the place.
Yeah.
It's been the place forever. I think
Yeah.
it still is. Another place is the View Conference in Turin, Italy. Every year. I'm not sure. They've all been hit with hiccups because of COVID, but the View Conference is the best computer animation conference in the world, I believe. And the fact that it happens to be in Turin during white truffle season kind of adds to it. I get asked related questions to that a lot. I really don't, I can give you my kind of canned answer, but I don't know whether it really applies to anybody but me. So one part of the answer is know exactly who you are. And then go where the action is, if you can. Okay. Both of those are hard. Like I thought, sure, I was an animator for years and years and years. I was convinced that I was an animator until I met John Lasseter, a real animator, and I've realized I'm nowhere close. I don't have that skill at all, and I never will. He can't tell me what it is, and I don't have it. I can make things move, but I can't convince you they're conscious. And if you can't do that, you're not an animator. Don't aspire to be one. Do what you really are good at, and then be the best you can in what you're good at, and go where the action is. Which is real easy to say. I did it until I was 40 before I finally got married and had kids. I was able to change sides of the country, but most, a lot of people in their 20s are already got the family and the job and they don't want to move and so forth. So easy to say, hard to do. And go to SIGGRAPH, for Christ's sake. That's just easy. That's just the place.
I just had another question, if you don't mind. I just was wondering, should you ever be discouraged to apply for a company and they may not be exactly what you're looking for, or it might be too tall of an order to apply for such a huge company?
I missed the gist. Try me again.
Sorry. Should you ever be discouraged to apply to like a really big company? And if they're too big of a company, should I be worried about applying for them?
Oh, I don't think so. I mean, most companies are really collections of small groups, right? And it's that group that's interviewing you is the interesting one. It hardly matters if there's some multi-billionaire running the whole thing somewhere else. That just doesn't matter. There are really hotshot groups inside the large companies today. I would die and go to heaven to be part of those back when I was young. Okay.
Yep. Yeah, by the way, that's what was it you told me? You said something, luck favors the prepared, right? That was the real beauty of
you gotta be prepared. Don't just say you know computer graphics. Know it.
Yep.
You've read every book and know everything, and there is to know. Okay. So I'm looking at the chat again here. Why did I include Ice Age, but not Ants and Shrek? I did include Ants. By the way, I just put up 3 movies from 3 different companies at or near the millennium. And it was the first movie from the 3 companies, Pixar, DreamWorks, and Ice Age. That's why I chose those three. But any of those movies during that time were that was our dream. It took us 20 years to get there, from having the vision in 1975 to actually turning out the movie in 1995.
We got a
Would we have
question.
stuck if we had?
Yeah. Come down. Sorry, this will make it easier if you.
Okay.
Squeeze through the metal.
Just do one more. Yes.
Well, first off, Alvy, I love your beard. It's beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. My name is Jake Adams.
No, that's not really a beard. That's a mask. It's disguised as a beard.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, that's very protective, you know. It's beautiful.
Yeah. Right.
But yeah, I'm a visiting lecturer with the Interactive Games and Media Department, and I specialize in digital holographic animation and asset production, as well as VR and mixed reality. But my question, I guess, is how do you see the kind of tangibility or the phenomenological tangibility of mixed reality affecting narrative, affecting narrative altogether, I guess, in general, as that technology grows? Kind of a, pretty broad question, but.
It is, and I haven't the foggiest how to answer it either, just to be honest.
Yeah.
It's
Stump the death.
you just defined a whole medium and asked me how to exploit it, and I could just barely wrap my heads around the new medium. I'm not even sure what a mixed reality is going to actually feel like if we ever solve all the problems. I mean, it's easy to do a little bit of mixing, but a full mixture of synthesized environment with a created environment, gee, that could go so many different directions. I don't know. I'm leaving it up to guys like you to define it for us.
Yeah, oh, that's what we're trying to do. Yeah, it's not easy, but it's certainly fun, at least for nerds like myself. But yeah,
I bet.
Yeah, it's good.
Great. Thanks.
Just wanted to throw that in there. Yeah.
Anybody else?
Welcome.
Well, Alvy, I'll tell you what, it's been great and nice to see you, even though we're separated by a big piece of glass. I'm going to turn it back to Tim here. Oh, by the way,
It's all pixels. It's all pixels.
look what Beth found. Look what Beth found before she found my old Pixar
Amazing.
jacket. How about that for a
Boy,
crazy-
it still exists. I wish I had
Yeah.
mine.
Yeah, well, you know what happened is my dog destroyed the leather. It's a long story, but she had it rebuilt, and so, but she thought that you would, you would enjoy seeing some of that old leftover goodness. But anyway, I'm going to give you back to Tim. But thanks again, Al.
Okay,
Well,
great seeing you, Flip.
oh,
I probably should go.
Yes.
I probably should go. My in-laws live a few blocks from here, and they're waiting dinner for me. So.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. We really, really appreciate it. Hopefully we'll get you maybe next year, and maybe you'll write another book and we'll keep you back.
Yeah, not likely on that book.
Awesome.
10 years was hard. Okay, bye everybody. I enjoyed
Thank
it.
you.
All right, see you, Al. Yeah, it's Baobab.
B-A-O-B-A-B.
Yeah.
Well, if anybody, I don't know if anybody's still on anymore, but
Yeah.
we can stop recording, huh?
Yeah.